We're very proud to be bringing Admiral Stavridis in for some amazing events today. He already had a great lunch with us, a great dinner, and now an amazing speaking event that's going to be pretty impressive when we have Rickey Bevington having the conversation for the World Affairs Council. First and foremost, I definitely want to thank you all again for being here. My organization is really focused on bringing veterans onto a stage like this, and the Admiral is one of those that we're very proud to present to y'all. In order to introduce them appropriately, many of y'all probably already know the gentleman, but there's a gentleman by the name of Sheffield Hale, who's the CEO of the Atlanta History Center. We're going to let him introduce everybody. If y'all give him a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Zach. We're very grateful for the partnership with the Business Executives of National Security, otherwise known as BINS, for the opportunity to host Admiral Stavridis here tonight. On behalf of the Atlanta History Center, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for attending the event. Of course, as he just told you, and I'm Sheffield Hale, and I'm the President and CEO. Tonight, we're joined by Admiral James Stavridis, and if you haven't gotten a copy of his book, 2054, it's available to you in the lobby for 25% off. Now, if a cell phone goes off tonight, it's only 20% off. So would y'all please turn off your cell phones or put it on pleasure mode, whatever you want to do. It's fine. You hear more about Admiral Stavridis in a moment, but it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Rickey Bevington. Rickey is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, and executive in residence at Georgia State University's Robinson College of Business. She has spent 2 decades as a television and radio journalist. For years, many of us relied on Rickey for analysis of global and local issues alike, as she reported on Georgia Public Broadcasting, PBS NewsHour, and National Public Radio. She has received many fellowships and awards for her work and has extensive international reporting and travel experience. I'm very grateful for her being with us tonight to conduct this interview. She is our go-to interviewer. Please join me in welcoming Rickey Bevington.
Thank you, Sheffield. Thank you so much, Sheffield. It's always a pleasure to be here at the Atlanta History Center. This is a place where Atlanta's history is kept and guarded for safekeeping. It's also a place where my family's artifacts and stories have been kept and are still safe. For 4 generations, we've been in Atlanta, so for that I'm very grateful. Sheffield and his team take incredible care. They're very thoughtful about how the History Center documents all of our history. Atlanta history is our shared history, our people, our politics, our culture, our natural environment, and so much more. I am president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. The council is a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership forum for informed discussion of global affairs that impact Atlanta's economy, culture, and quality of life. We were founded in 2010 by visionary Atlanta civic and business leaders who understood then, as we understand now, that it's more important than ever that we understand the global events and trends and issues that shape our city, our country, and our nation. The World Affairs Council of Atlanta opens doors to critical information and insight that brings Atlantans together with diplomats, dignitaries, executives, and of course, subject matter experts. So we look forward to seeing all of you at a future World Affairs Council of Atlanta event. We have some board members in the audience. If you would just raise your hand, Dennis Lockhart and Rich Phillips, thank you so much for representing the World Affairs Council here today. On May 8th, the Council will be exploring the current and future state of the European Union with world-renowned expert Dr. Constanze Stelzenmüller from the Brookings Institution. So we look forward to seeing you then. So Sheffield mentioned that he and I go back many years. In many ways, he and I are in the same business. The World Affairs Council of Atlanta and the Atlanta History Center, we share the same overall mission, and that's why you're here today. Our mission is to educate Atlantans about the people, events, and issues that shape history. Our guest tonight has been at the center of a lot of recent history. Admiral James Stavridis spent more than 30 years in the US Navy, rising to the rank of 4-star admiral. He was Supreme Allied Commander at NATO and previously commanded US Southern Command, overseeing military operations through Latin America. At sea, he commanded a Navy destroyer, a destroyer squadron, and an aircraft carrier battle group in combat. He holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, where he recently served 5 years as dean. He received 50 medals in the course of his military career, including 28 from foreign nations. He has published 12 other books and is chief international analyst for NBC News and a Bloomberg Opinion weekly columnist. And he's currently partner and vice chair of global affairs at the Carlyle Group and the chair of the board of the Rockefeller Foundation. Admiral James Stavridis, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you. What a pleasure. Okay. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Welcome to Atlanta.
Can I say one thing off the top, which is that I have a strong Atlanta connection. My daughter, Christina, lives here. She lives in Virginia Highlands. She is kind of mid-career at Google, 30-something, doing wonderfully there. And her husband is an emergency room doctor who was the chief resident at Grady Memorial. You know what that means. Very significant post. During those years, he would see a lot of significant casualties, more than my docs saw in Afghanistan. A wonderful young man. He is now running the emergency room at Emory University. So if you need emergency care, give me a call. And here's the punchline. We have 3 little grandchildren, 5, 3, and 1. So Atlanta is very much home to us, and we're very happy to be with all of you.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you back sometime soon.
You bet.
But for the next hour or so, you are ours to talk about your new book, 2054. As much as I want to delve into geopolitics, this is an author talk. So let's talk about the book. I'm going to ask you to read just this first section, and I've marked it here, really to just set the scene for, this is book 2054, but we're really picking up from the first book in this trilogy, which we'll get to, 2034. So please read this and then set the stage for where the book begins.
I'd be glad to. So let me set the broader stage. 2034, set in that year, 10 years from now, hypothesizes a terrible event, a war between the U.S. and China. At the conclusion of that war, the U.S. is diminished, China is diminished. Neither side wins. 2034 is not Tom Clancy. You know, kind of good guys win in the end, last 15 minutes. 2034 is not that book. The villain in 2034 is war. And so as we open 2054, set mid-century, one of the surviving characters from that period of war, 2034, is flying to the United States. He has become a very successful business leader in India. So as he flies to the United States, he knew the land beneath him carried scars. But when observed from such a height, those scars appeared to vanish. The geometric partitions of farmland, the crowns of pure snow on distant mountains, the rebuilt cities, studying the vague horizon, all of it evidence of how the nation had seemed to heal itself. It was as if the events of 20 years past had never occurred. Those events, that war between the United States and China, had driven him from this place, but he decided to return to the nation of his birth, to his true home.
Tell us about Sandy Chowdhury.
So the character to whom you are introduced is Indian American, and this is a thread that passes through 2034. Ultimately, the war between the US and China benefits India. And Sandy Chowdhury, at the beginning of 2034, is a young staffer at the National Security Council. Tragically, his wife is killed in the war. His young daughter survives, and as the war ends, he departs the United States. It's the inverse of the immigrant story with which we are so familiar. And so Sandy goes back to India, gets into business, becomes incredibly successful. And as we meet him in this book, he is returning to the United States.
And he's flying over Galveston, Texas, which has been destroyed by nuclear bombs from China. 2054 is the second of the planned trilogy, 2034 being the first. So you're writing with your co-author, Elliot Ackerman. What are you trying to achieve over the course of this trilogy?
3-4 years ago, my vision was to write 3 novels. And I had written, 10 books of nonfiction about ship handling and leadership and history and biography, and I enjoyed writing nonfiction. But I really wanted to write a novel. I'm sure everybody here harbors a secret ambition to write a novel. So I went to my editor at Penguin Press, and I said, okay, I've done 10 books of nonfiction, bunch of bestsellers. How about if I write a novel? And he said, and I quote, Admiral, you're a good writer, and you're a great guy, but you are not a novelist. Well, that wounded me deeply. And so I said to him, I was like an 8-year-old kid. I said, yes, I can write a novel. I know I can do it. And so at this point, I'd written 10 books of nonfiction, bestsellers, and he put me back in author boot camp, which is, okay, write a detailed outline, write a couple of sample chapters, and we'll see where it goes. I think he did that thinking I would just peel off and go away. So I sat down, I wrote a detailed outline. I'm going to answer your question. And wrote a couple of sample chapters. And when I went back to see him again, he said, and I quote, Admiral, you're a pretty good writer, and you're a great guy. But how about if we find a real novelist, this hurt me deeply, a real novelist that you can partner with to write this book? So this is a long way of saying I had this kind of vision of 3 novels about the challenges of the 21st century. 1, great power war with China and the United States. Number 2, 2054, a novel about artificial intelligence and civil conflict in America. And the 3rd book, 2084, is about climate and what happens if the trajectory of climate is such that we end up in a global confrontation between the disadvantaged global south and the advantaged global north. So that was the arc of the project. And we're now 2nd novel into it, which I'm very pleased with. And the 3rd one, 2084, is with the editors now. So I want to conclude with this. People say to me, oh, okay, I get it. You're writing predictive fiction. You're trying to tell us what 2034 will look like or what 2054 will look like. No, this is not predictive fiction. This is cautionary fiction. The idea is if we can imagine our way to a very dangerous future, we still have time to reverse engineer it, to avoid the catastrophes that are laid out here. The inspiration for this, interestingly, I think, was Cold War literature. I mean, many here, like me, not Rickey, but many here can remember the Cold War. Two massive systems in opposition: United States, NATO, USSR, Warsaw Pact. 3 million troops, nose to nose, ready to, as the saying goes, to fight tonight in Central Europe. 2 massive battle fleets playing Hunt for Red October around the world. 2 20,000 each nuclear arsenals on hair trigger alert. That was the Cold War. And there was a rich body of fiction that described how terrible it would be if we collided in a war and the Cold War became a hot war, right? Dr. Strangelove, On the Beach by Neville Shute, Red Storm Rising, Tom Clancy, Third World War, Sir John Hackett, the Bedford Incident, 7 Days in May. I could go on and on. The point is, because in some part to that cautionary fiction of the Cold War, I think we avoided a hot war. That ultimately is the idea of these novels, to frighten us, to warn us, to encourage us to reverse engineer it, to avoid the catastrophe.
And why use fiction as the vehicle to deliver this message?
Yeah, great question. Because a lot of people have said to me, oh, you want to avoid a war with China, why don't you write a nice policy book for the Council on Foreign Relations? And the short answer is audience. You know, you can write that policy book and, 612 people will read it. I always say about these journals, like the Foreign Affairs, the subtitle ought to be The Journal of Nobody Actually Reads It. So, yeah, exactly. So the first answer is audience. If you can write a page-turning book that have real characters in it, more people will read it. A policy book in America will sell 3,000 copies, maybe 4,000. 2034 has sold 400,000 copies. It's published today in 22 languages. It'll probably eventually get to a big screen. It's about a war with China. It's audience, point one. Point two, characters. Those policy books, they're boring because there are no characters, right? I mean, we all want stories. Mm-hmm. We want to hear how other people are living, who they are engaged with, who they're sleeping with, what's happening in their lives. That is what pulls us as humans into a story. And finally, footnotes are boring. Nonfiction, with all due respect, and I've written 10 books of nonfiction, it's not exactly boring, but you put yourself in a straitjacket when you write a book of nonfiction. You're kind of required to be factual, to be accurate, to have footnotes. Boring. In a novel, you get to put a lot of paint on the canvas. So that's why I write fiction now. And by the way, I'll say this to a public audience. I'll never write another book of nonfiction.
Because you enjoy it so much.
Because I enjoy fiction. Yeah. I have another novel completely different than this, a book about World War II, historical fiction, coming out this fall. And then the conclusion to this book, and then we'll see where it goes. But I'm all done with nonfiction.
Because it's boring.
Because it's boring. It's like, my wife always says, why can't we have lasagna? And I say, because lasagna is a casserole and casseroles are boring.
Well, somebody was asking me about the book, and I said, well, it's dystopian, except it's scarier because it could actually happen.
Right.
So what do you want people to come away with? What do you want us to do with being scared of what could actually happen in our lifetimes?
Well, let's begin with the proposition about 2054, which is it's artificial intelligence, which is at work kind of in the background. And I assume everybody is starting to wake up to artificial intelligence, right? Many of you already have gone on ChatGPT, you've commissioned a poem about your life, you know, you have found your way to using artificial intelligence. This is real. We are, if I can use an American aviation metaphor, we're on the beach at Kitty Hawk. We're just starting. No one knows how far this will go. In my world, my wheelhouse, the military, AI will change everything. It's like the advent of the English longbowmen at the Battle of Agincourt. It's like tanks in World War II. It's like nuclear weapons. It will change everything. And so, point one, recognize how early on we are in all of this. And obviously not just in the military, but in our lives broadly. Point two, like all new technologies, AI can be of enormous benefit and it can be enormously malevolent. I'll give you an example from hundreds of years ago, the printing press. Think about the printing press for a minute. Before that, knowledge was tightly constrained to monasteries, to monks who guarded it. And yet suddenly there is this ability to produce something called a book, which meant that the world would have access to knowledge. Who hated that? The church, the monks, and many of the knighted aristocracy because they were smart enough to see the implications. So to some, the printing press was a very malevolent force. To others who had a more, shall we say, enlightened view, the printing press represented a sudden opening to knowledge. I'll give you another example. I'll pull it out of my pocket. What is this thing? Yeah, this is a supercomputer. It can communicate point to point anywhere in the world. It can access all the world's knowledge. It can play any symphony ever recorded. It can show you any film ever made. It can also access you to a river of filth and pornography. It can expose you to conspiracy theories and lies. Is it good or is it evil? Printing press, good or evil? Artificial intelligence, good or evil? That's the point of 2054.
Like I said, dystopian, but it could actually happen. So in the interest of time, I'll summarize the singularity. Before I ask you to expand on it, without giving you too much away, there's an assassination of an important figure, and it's effectively assassination by code. What is the singularity?
Sure.
And it really is the AI of this book.
So the singularity is not something I've invented or my co-author Elliot's invented. About 10 years ago, I read a book called The Singularity is Near. It's by a futurist named Ray Kurzweil, who, by the way, is a character in 2054. Homage, still alive, by the way. We're still waiting to hear his review of the book. We'll see. His idea of the singularity was it was the point where our biology who we are, our memories, our ideas, our preferences, our loves, our hates, everything about who we are, that biology merges, singularity comes together to one with technology. At the furthest end of this, I could take Rickey, her brain, her memories, her ideas, the electrical impulses that drive her mind, and I could upload it on a chip. And that sounds like insane and crazy and futuristic. Not so much. 3 weeks ago, Elon Musk was talking about implants in your brain that would give you the ability to speak foreign languages. This is far from impossible. And as we get toward mid-century, Rickey, the singularity is the idea of that merger. Once you do that, your mind, your ideas, your sensibilities, by definition, become immortal, not attached to this fallible physical body anymore, but immortal. And secondly, power. Once all of those proclivities are uploaded and have access to the internet, where can they go? What can they do? And as the book opens, the President of the United States is giving a speech. By the way, he's neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I think that's probably realistic by mid-century, given the way in which the public looks at both these political parties. But the president, third party in our current context, is giving a speech. He's in his third term of office, and suddenly he collapses on the stage. He dies. The autopsy, which happens, this is all in the first 20 pages, the autopsy at Walter Reed, the National Medical Center, flashes forward. The physician conducting the autopsy is examining the heart of the president. And he raises it, examines it, and looks at the images of the president's last electrocardiogram scan and says, this can't be the heart of the president. How did that happen? Who did it? Why? That's the thread of 2054.
So to contrast, you mentioned power.
Yeah.
2034 and in today's world, we understand power to be controlled by governments. Ultimately, in 2034 and today, one country goes to war against another country with traditional weapons as we understand them. Unfortunately, in 2034, nuclear weapons are the weapons of choice, but it's two governments controlling militaries that control weapons. In 2054, we have non-state actors, big tech, criminal enterprises, who are now in the sandbox with governments, and everybody is in an AI arms race. Is that the future of geopolitical power?
I would argue it's pretty close to the present. And if you look at today's world and you look at the power that's aggregating toward Elon Musk, toward Google, Amazon, Microsoft, the major tech companies, there's a lot to that argument. Now, do they have private armies? No. Can they apply lethal force? No. Do they have control of currencies? This is becoming a gray area. People ask me a lot about, well, what do you think about cryptocurrency? And I would tell you, as an investor, you know, as a partner at Carlyle and a vice chairman, ultimately, sovereign states will control currencies, probably. But watch who controls those levers of ultimate power, which are the application of lethal force, control of currencies, and control of physical space. Microsoft, Elon Musk can't declare South Texas Musk land yet. And I think that we would be foolish to ignore those trend lines. Having said all that, as yet, I would not bet against sovereign states. There is an enormous vested control of power. And final thought, if you look at the novel 2054, which opens with a political assassination, and people say to me, oh, wow, that's, you know, you're really looking out there mid-century. You know, my response is, actually, I'm looking back 2,500 years ago. This is Julius Caesar. Power, reaction, control, different technologies, but those human impulses haven't changed that much.
You have fought, again, in the context of this conversation, traditional warfare for your entire career.
Yeah.
I think about 2023 as the year that both Oppenheimer becomes a big Oscar-winning film, and it's the same year that ChatGPT comes out. So the contrast of nuclear technology and AI, building on control and power. Historically, governments have always controlled, if not nuclear warheads, at least the capacity to continue a fight, right? I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure required to fire a nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. Should sovereign governments take control of AI in the way that they took control and continue to take control every day to control nuclear weapons?
I think you're missing the movie. The movie is really Barbie. Stay with me.
It is a sci-fi film.
Barbie is about control. It's about power. It's about gender, which you haven't mentioned. It's about who controls a society. What are the levers of power in that society? And, you know, here's a news flash. It's not all about Ken.
Shocker.
So my point is, to answer your question, each society needs to be thinking coherently about the levers of power. And yes, to answer your question directly, AI is one of those levers of power. And if sovereign states do not control it early, as they are continuing to control military force, and as they are trying to control currencies, if they default to lack of control about artificial intelligence, I don't think it's going to turn out well for Barbie. So, point being, you have to, as a society, you have to understand where these levers are. And yes, AI. And another subtext in the novel is the race, the foot race between the nations about artificial intelligence, which, by the way, in the real world, here we are, let's flash out of the novel, let's jump into 2024. The question you ought to be asking as Americans concerned about our national security is not how many aircraft carriers do we have, how many tanks do we have, how good are Navy SEALs. We're great at all that stuff. We are very good at launching missiles. We need to make sure we know how to control ideas. Artificial intelligence is the foot race, and China is just behind us, and not very far, and moving quickly. You know, in the 50s, we talked about a missile gap. In the 70s and 80s, we talked about the space race. Today, it's about artificial intelligence. And not to get overly technical, but what's coming right behind AI is quantum computing. We don't have time to unpackage that, but maybe I'll do that in my next novel. But the point is, we are in a foot race with China. We're still in the lead. We need to maintain that lead for all the reasons we're talking about tonight, Rickey.
In fact, you have argued for another branch of the military, a cyber force.
I have.
Talk about what that would look like.
I can. So I think most folks here can identify the branches of the U.S. military, right? It's the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force came along a little later. We can argue about the Coast Guard, which is a guard. But 3 years ago, good move, we created a Space Force. And, you know, it got kind of mocked on television, and there was a kind of a silly sitcom about the start of the Space Force. Believe me, you want a Space Force. You want real experts. I think what we truly need now is a cyber force. And by the way, you know, the US Navy has hundreds of thousands of people. Same with the Army, same with the big Air Force. The cyber force would have 5,000 people, be a tiny fraction, but it would be highly expert individuals who grew up in cyber and AI, who would be dedicated to that mission. It is, in my view, extremely clear that we need that force, and that's part of the messaging in 2054. Create a cyber force, which, by the way, will pick up the artificial intelligence piece of this.
Well, you must be observing developments in that realm with two active wars in our hemisphere, at least, in Gaza and Ukraine. What are the latest developments in cyber warfare that you're seeing?
Let me start with Ukraine, which is this incredible dichotomy. So here in Ukraine, in the 21st century, you see unfolding in front of you a war entirely recognizable to a soldier 100 years ago, right? You see trenches, tanks, artillery battles, mud, blood, hand-to-hand combat. You know, if you want a novel, it's All Quiet on the Western Front by Remarque. It's a World War I trench fight. On the other hand, in this same battle, you see Starship Troopers, the novel by Robert Heinlein. Some of you may have seen the movie, but it's unmanned warfare, satellites, exquisite intelligence, extraordinary special forces, drones in the air, on the sea, and the land. It's the ultimate 21st century battle. So, Rickey, as I look at the war in Ukraine, I don't see an on and off switch of old war, new war. I see a rheostat. You know what that is? Like the dimmer in your dining room, right? You can turn up the light, you can turn down the light. So what I see is a rheostat that is dialing toward these new technologies. And that's where cyber AI are going to hit the battlefield. And they're going to change it, just like the Battle of Agincourt, the tank battles of World War I, the first steel ships, nuclear weapons. There are these pivot points in military history. We are watching one unfold in Ukraine.
We hear lately about low recruiting numbers in our military, and yet we have coders. Right. We have Robinson College of Business and Georgia State University. Dean Phillips is here. We have brilliant young minds right here in Atlanta who could be our future cyber force. Do you think that the American education system, the American society right now is prepared to bring young people in to defend our country in the cybersphere?
Let me give you kind of the good news and the bad news, and I'll start with the bad news. The bad news, and there's some good news in the bad news, but the bad news for the military is that the military has to compete to bring in this all-volunteer force. As you all know, we don't have a draft in this country. So we've got to convince young people to come into the military. The bad news is that our civilian economy is doing very well. Lowest unemployment historically. To work at a McDonald's, you make now $20 an hour. My good friend Jeff Rosenzweig, one of the great professors of business of our time here at Emory University, would tell you this economy is humming. It really is. And therefore, the military has to compete. And just put yourself in this position. You can work in a civilian firm and make, let's say, starting salary $50,000. Or you can join the military, shave your head, which means more to some people than others. But you can shave your head, go to boot camp, arrive on a ship, deploy for 6 months at a time, risk your life at, you know, kind of $40,000 a year. That's a tough argument to make. You can get there with serve your country, see the world, work with wonderful people. You know, there are counter arguments. But as long as that civilian economy has an unemployment rate of like 3%, that's a pretty hard competition. In terms of, is American society capable of delivering the all-volunteer force? I think it is, Rickey. And yeah, we are a little bit below hitting some of the recruiting goals. And the second part of that is to qualify to get into your military, you have to be essentially high school graduate, drug-free, zero criminal record, no mental health issues, never taken an ADHD drug, no asthma. When you're done with all the caveats of who can even join your military, only 25% of high school graduates qualify. So that 25%, now you're competing with a very hot civilian economy. So yes, it's hard. Having said all that, I'm convinced that we will continue to find young men and women who want to stand and deliver for their country because they care about serving the country and they care about being part of something larger than themselves. And they want to stand shoulder to shoulder with other volunteers to be citizens of the Republic in the most meaningful way. I think that counts for a lot. I think the country will continue to deliver.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and on that theme, actually, we've touched more on AI than we have on the civil unrest of the novel, and yet it seems to work out. Are you hopeful? No, you've eliminated the two-party system.
Right.
You haven't eliminated social media, so I'll hope you do that in your next book.
Good luck with that one.
The way you end this book is actually rather hopeful. Are you truly hopeful for the reuniting of our country?
I absolutely am. And I want to begin with a political comment so you can score what I'm about to say. I'm a centrist. I'm a moderate. I'm a registered independent. Always have been, always will be. I've never made a political contribution. I've never endorsed a political candidate. Having said that, I was vetted for vice president by Hillary Clinton, one of 6 people vetted by her campaign, and I was offered a cabinet post by Donald Trump. I think of that as 2 bullets whizzing by my head at really close range. Here's my point, and I'm speaking to you. I assume we have a pretty wide, diverse audience here. I'm speaking to you whether You wake up in the morning watching Morning Joe and you wrap it up on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, or you start with Fox and Friends and you can't wait. You want to get home tonight to hear what Sean Hannity has to say. I don't care where you are on that political spectrum. You ought to be very concerned about the divisions in this country. And you ought to be doing everything you can to listen to the other side. And if you are in your MSNBC or your Fox News echo chamber, get out of it. Start listening to the other side and start having civil conversations where you have policy disagreements. Those are fine. We're going to disagree about everything. We are a fractious people in this country. We always have been. We started in 1776 with independence. We could not agree a constitution until 1789, 13 years later. Then we had the Whiskey Rebellion, Shays Revolt, 1,000 little attempted successions, and we culminated, I don't need to tell a room full of Atlanteans, in a civil war that killed a third of the male population of this country. We're a fractious people. But having said all of that, I believe we will find our way out of this dark thicket of personal bitterness and anger and disagreement, because it's not who we are. I believe that. And I think over time, cliche, but I'll quote it from Abraham Lincoln, our better angels will find us. And the way to that path is not in surrendering your positions on policies. It's about listening to the other side. And I'll conclude with this. I spent 5 years as the dean of a law school in Boston, arguably the most liberal state in the country. You know, the People's Republic of Massachusetts, right? It's actually pretty accurate. Very, very, very blue state. Who was the governor of Massachusetts all 5 years? Republican, Charlie Baker. He was routinely for 5 years voted the best governor in America by the other governors. A Republican in Massachusetts. Someone who would reach across the aisle. Who was my congressman? My congressman, logically, was a Democrat, a guy named Seth Moulton, a veteran, combat Marine, pretty progressive guy, but someone part of the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, someone who reached across the aisle. You know, those candidates exist. They're not chimeras. We need to find candidates who are willing to listen to the other side, reach across the aisle, generate compromise, disagree on policy without becoming personally disagreeable. I think we'll find our way there. But we're in a difficult season, a difficult year, and to the degree I have a message for everybody here, it would be listen to the other side, be respectful, be civil, reject those who are not.
Before Admiral Wright comes up to say some closing remarks.
The other Admiral.
The other Admiral. What can we look forward to in 2080 for your next book?
Yeah, so Admiral Stavridis is happy to see Admiral Wright. That makes me Admiral wrong, I guess. But, in 2084, we advance deeply into this century, and the effects of climate have created real difficulties and arguments in geopolitics. And we see the part of the world that has been disadvantaged by climate, so India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Brazil, the equatorial band decides it's time to contest what has the hand of cards we have been dealt, a conflict ensues between that advantaged global north and the global south. It's a return to big geopolitics set in the year 2084, comes out in about a year and a half. Thank you very much for having me
We'll
here,
have you
Rickey.
back. Thank you, Admiral James Stavridis.
Admiral Wright.
Sir, I'm going to give you a head start on signing books.
Okay.
In the back.
Okay.
And books are for sale in the back for folks that don't have a book that would like to have one signed. So.
Thank you very much. It's great to be in Atlanta.
While they're leaving for the book signing, just a few thanks and remarks. The idea here, Admiral Jim Stavridis, the interrogator, Rickey Bevington, with the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. What you're going to see is this cross-organization venue model that we leveraged to have these events that we're enjoying here in Atlanta. The action officer, Zach Knight, Army Ranger, an amazing, amazing planner. I love Zach. The venue is a jewel called the Atlanta History Center. Sheffield, your wonderful husband, Claire Haley, and the incredible team. We had an event this afternoon at the Buckhead Club. Again, same sort of incredible performance. The convener is the business executives for national security. Ben's, the largest region in the nation, is here in Atlanta. And Sid, where are you? Sid Talley, our regional director. Fiercely nonpartisan pursuit of the most challenging national security problems. So it's been our honor having you with us. Thank you very much for participating, and please drive safe going home tonight.